Early one morning, Tornado was backing down onto the express. As usual, a couple of rail fans were watching, eagerly snapping photos of the new build engine at work.
I imagine you're getting used to this by now.
Tornado chuckled.
Indeed. I definitely know where the guaranteed connections are now.
Suddenly, a waiting teenager gasped and pointed to Tornado.
Hey Dad, isn't that the engine who was on Top Gear last night?
A few of the passengers turned to look, and an excited murmur started amongst the crowd.
What's Top Gear?
Oh, it's a program about cars. You know, car reviews, motoring challenges, that sort of thing.
James frowned, even more confused.
Then what was an express engine like you doing on a program about that?
Oh, they wanted to do a retro race between myself, a vintage car and a vintage motorcycle. Jeremy Clarkson acted as my fireman for the trip.
Oh! Please tell me you won.
I lost to the car, I'm afraid, but I did beat the motorcycle.
I see.
James glanced enviously at the crowd surrounding Tornado.
You know, I've been on TV too.
Really?
Yes. A few years ago, a thin clergyman wrote some books about us, and they were turned into a TV series in the 1980s.
I think I've heard of it. I'll have to ask Driver if you can show me some episodes.
Before James could reply, his guard's whistle rang out. The red engine departed, quickly bringing his train up to speed.
Driver, do you know that Top Gear show?
Oh yes, I watch it when it's on. My wife doesn't quite care for it though, but it is quite popular.
How popular?
I think it's broadcast in quite a few countries overseas. Have you seen those I Am the Stig t-shirts?
I've seen a few passengers wearing them. Are they a part of it?
Oh yes, the Stig is Top Gear's anonymous racing driver. Some say he never blinks. Others say he's confused by stairs. All we know is he's called the Stig.
I see.
James replied, even though he didn't, really. He fell silent a moment later. He'd seen how those passengers had been crowding around Tornado, and he couldn't remember having received such attention himself recently. Despite, James thought bitterly, the TV series about him and his friends. They had a whole TV series, and Tornado had only appeared on one episode of a car show. It wasn't fair, James thought. A couple of days later, James had just delivered some supplies to the works. With his delivery done, he collected the rest of his trucks and moved off towards the main line to continue his slow goods run. Just before he cleared the points, however, he was stopped by a red signal. A moment later, a whistle sounded out, and Tornado pulled into Crovan's Gate station.
Bother.
James exclaimed. He'd been hoping to pick up his trucks and be underway before the express arrived. Now he'd have to wait. But at least it would only be a couple of minutes, he thought. However, it was another 7 minutes before the express departed.
What kept him? The express was supposed to have left a few minutes ago.
James grumbled to himself as Tornado accelerated past. A few moments later, the line was clear, and James headed out onto the main line. Later that evening, James and some of the other engines were resting in the shed when Tornado arrived.
Oh, I apologise for the delay at Crovan's Gate earlier.
Tornado said,
There were some rather persistent rail fans who insisted on taking as many photos as they could.
Then it's just as well the rest of us don't have that problem. Maybe if you didn't have people fawning over you at every station, you'd be able to concentrate on what you're doing.
James snapped, taking the other engines by surprise.
James,
What?
green really isn't your colour, James.
Then I suppose that's why I actually get my work done. There's nobody fawning over me.
James remarked snidely, glaring at Tornado. He chuffed off a moment later, leaving some very shocked engines behind him.
I had no idea. Is he?
Oh, I wouldn't worry about it too much, Tornado. but I think he's just a bit jealous. He'll blow over soon.
I hope you're right.
Henry was right. James was indeed jealous. The next morning, down at the harbour, he was complaining to Diesel.
Name dropping like that. Who cares if Jeremy What's-His-Name was his fireman for one run? I mean, those of us who've worked here for decades, who've featured in the Thin Clergyman's books, are more deserving of that sort of attention.
I can see your point, but those stories are still quite popular. Just the other day, I was doing some shunting over by that new cruise terminal. One of the passengers saw me and asked me why I'd been so nasty to Duck all those years ago.
But that was just one passenger. Tornado's got dozens of people.
One passenger, yes, but he was asking me about events in 1957. Judging by his appearance, he wouldn't even have been alive back then. Tornado may have his place in history, but the stories about us are enduring. I understand that's one of the main reasons why we get so many visitors each summer.
What would you know? You weren't even there for most of them.
With that, James chuffed back to collect his trucks. Unfortunately for James, the trucks quickly realised he was in a bad mood. They took full advantage of this, bumping him when they could, and overheating their axle boxes a couple of times. By the time they approached Wellsworth, James was getting quite fed up with them.
Come on!
James called, exasperated, as the trucks began holding back again. On the platform, two teenagers were waiting to watch Tornado come through.
Have I shown you my new phone, Tim? It can take videos as well as pictures. I mean, decent quality video.
Really?
Yes, I'll show you. Look, here comes James.
The teenager raised his phone to film the oncoming engine. James didn't notice. He was more concerned about his trucks, who were still holding back.
Stop it!
He jerked forwards. A loud snap sounded out, closely followed by the hiss of an open brake line. James felt the train's brakes come on. He looked back, annoyed. Sure enough, the rear of his train had broken away.
You silly trucks! Honestly, what is the point? Do you have nothing better to do than muck about and cause trouble?
James's outburst only brought a giggle from the trucks.
Calm down, James. We'll just replace the broken coupling and be on our way.
The Red Engine's driver quickly put his words into action. Once that was done, they set off once more. Later, that afternoon, James was taking the slow passenger train down the line. As he pulled into Kelsthorpe Road, he heard a couple of passengers giggling. The Red Engine shot a curious look at Eric, who was waiting on the branch line platform.
Did I miss something?
I don't think so, James. I overheard him saying something about YouTube as you approached. You're on it, apparently.
YouTube? But the only thing I've been on all day is my wheels.
YouTube is a video sharing website, James.
James's driver explained as the train got underway. It was the same story at Kildane Station, but Steve the electric engine couldn't explain it either. James noticed it at the next few stations too, and it bugged him for the rest of the day. Later that evening, the engines were resting in the sheds.
I was just wondering, did any of you notice your passengers acting strangely?
How do you mean, James?
Just, well, anything out of the ordinary.
I haven't noticed anything, James. What's on your mind?
Before James could reply, his driver arrived. He had a small notebook computer, which he held up to the Red Engine.
James, there's something I think you should see.
What's that?
James's driver clicked one of the buttons on the laptop. James watched, shocked. as a video of his earlier incident at Wellsworth played out on the screen in front of him.
What? How?
It seems someone on the platform at Wellsworth this morning caught your little mishap on video and put it on YouTube.
Why does that video say 1127 beneath it?
Well, Henry, that's how many times the video's been watched.
James frowned.
What? They had no right!
James spluttered indignantly. What's the matter, James? I thought you wanted to be famous.
Well, yes, but...
James fell silent a moment later, as the other engines chuckled. Well, most of them. Tornado was amused, but he hadn't laughed as hard as the other engines, or for as long. He understood exactly how James was feeling. The next morning, James was taking on water outside the sheds when Tornado came alongside.
Morning, Tornado.
Morning, James.
Silence fell, for a moment.
I guess I owe you an apology, Tornado. I must admit, I was a bit jealous the other night.
Oh, don't worry, James, I quite understand. No hard feelings. If it makes you feel better, I've had that sort of embarrassment too.
Really?
Yes. You should ask your driver to look at my boiler test. I used up too much water and I had to call the fire department for more. I think that made the evening news.
Thank you.
Did I mention the Fat Controller has organised a special charity run for me to take?
I haven't heard that.
Well, it's been rather popular, and the Fat Controller's been keen to take bookings for it. It's to raise money for cancer research, and I get the impression it's a cause that's close to her heart.
Where are you going with this, Tornado?
It's ended up being 16 coaches long, and the Fat Controller thinks it would be best if it was double-headed. There'll be quite a few rail fans on the train. Going on past experience, they'll want to take lots of photos and videos.
Tornado looked closely at James.
I was wondering if you'd like to double-head it with me.
I'd enjoy that.
I'll let the Fat Controller know.
With that, Tornado departed to take the morning express. A couple of days later, both engines were at Knapford with the charity special. Tornado had been right. There were plenty of people there. Cameras flashed, and the buzz of excited conversation filled the station. James couldn't help grinning. He did enjoy being the focus of the right sort of attention. But, as they departed, James couldn't help thinking about what he'd learnt. Fame wasn't all it was cracked up to be.